Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Before we start, let me ask you something. Have you ever been truly alone? I mean really alone, where the nearest person is 50 miles away and help can't reach you for days? Because tonight, we're going to Alaska's smallest towns, where being alone means something very different. These are 8 most disturbing true Alaskan small-town horror stories. Now, I'm only going to tell you about 2 of them. There's a grocery store worker who found packages in the freezer with people's names on them, people who had been missing for weeks. And those people, they came back. But they came back wrong. Then there's a mailman who started getting letters addressed to himself, written in his own handwriting, describing a life he never lived. But here's the thing, whatever wrote those letters is getting better at being him. I can't tell you about the other 6. You'll have to hear those for yourself. But I promise you this, after tonight, you'll understand why some towns in Alaska are so empty. It's not because people left, it's because of what made them leave. Hit subscribe if you dare, turn off those lights, and let's begin. My name is Maria Gonzalez, and I've been working retail for 15 years. Started as a cashier at a Walmart in Phoenix when I was 16, worked my way up through assistant manager, department supervisor, you name it. I thought I'd seen everything. Black Friday riots, shoplifters hiding steaks in their pants, customers having meltdowns over expired coupons. But 3 years ago, I took a job as night manager at Bethel Foods in Western Alaska. And what happened there in October 2023 made me realize I didn't know anything about what people are really capable of. Bethel Foods is the only real grocery store serving 6,000 people in one of the most remote places in America. I moved up there for the money. They were paying double what I made in Phoenix, plus housing allowance. I thought it would be an adventure, maybe see the northern lights, experience something different. The night shift paid even better because most people didn't want to work alone in a building that size during those long Alaska winters. The work was usually peaceful. Restock shelves, handle late deliveries, deal with the occasional drunk trying to buy beer after midnight. Our store served as the hub for dozens of tiny villages scattered across the tundra, so we got strange requests, people ordering 50 pounds of flour for a village wedding, or asking if we could special order seal oil. I figured I'd seen it all. I was wrong. Bethel Foods sits on the edge of town like a concrete island in an ocean of frozen mud and scrub grass. It's one of those big box stores, but older, built in the 80s with those flickering fluorescent lights that never quite work right and concrete floors that echo every footstep. During my shift, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I was usually alone except for Bobby, my assistant, who came in at 4 to help with the morning deliveries. My routine was simple. Check the delivery manifest, restock the shelves that got picked clean during the day, handle the paperwork, and keep the building secure. We had a basic security system, 1B. Cameras covering the main aisles and exits, motion sensors, the works. Nothing fancy, but enough to catch shoplifters and make insurance happy. The meat department was my responsibility too. We got deliveries twice a week from Anchorage, fresh and frozen stuff flown in on cargo planes. Everything had to be logged, temperature checked, and rotated properly. In a place like Bethel, where fresh meat costs twice what it does in the lower 48, you don't waste anything. October 2023 started normal. The weather was getting colder, ice forming on the loading dock every morning. I'd been doing the job for almost 3 years by then, had my routines down to a science. Check the delivery manifest, verify everything against what actually arrived, stock what needed stocking. That's when things started going wrong. The first weird delivery came on October 10th. Jim, our regular driver, brought the usual order from our supplier in Anchorage: ground beef, steaks, chicken, the normal stuff. But when I checked the manifest against what he'd unloaded, there were extra packages. 3 of them, wrapped in brown paper instead of the usual plastic and foam, sitting in the bottom of the delivery truck. "What's this stuff?" I asked Jim. He scratched his head, looking genuinely confused. "I don't know. That's everything on my manifest. Maybe someone added them at the warehouse?" The packages were heavy, about the size of a large roast, wrapped tight in brown paper and tied with string. Each one had a handwritten label in what looked like a foreign language, definitely not English or Spanish, and not like any native Alaskan writing I'd seen before. The handwriting was shaky, like someone writing in the dark. I called our supplier's customer service line the next morning. After 20 minutes on hold and getting transferred 3 times, I finally reached someone who could check our account. "Ma'am, I show your regular order was delivered as requested. No additional items, no special charges to your account," the woman said. "But who's paying for these packages? I'm showing another account number covered those items. Someone else is paying for them." That didn't make sense. Who would pay to have random meat delivered to our store? I figured it was some kind of billing error, maybe packages meant for one of the village stores that got mixed up with our delivery. The meat inside looked fresh enough, but something about it bothered me. The cuts were wrong, like whoever butchered it had learned from pictures instead of actual training. The pieces didn't look like anything I'd seen in 15 years of retail. Too angular, too uneven. Bobby came in that morning and helped me unwrap one package to see what we were dealing with. The smell hit us immediately, not spoiled, but wrong. Metallic and sweet, like copper pennies mixed with vanilla. Bobby ran to the bathroom and threw up. We tossed all 3 packages in the dumpster. The next delivery had 6 extra packages. Same brown paper, same strange handwriting, same wrong smell. Jim swore he was only bringing what was on his manifest, but there they were. I was getting frustrated. Someone was using our store as a drop-off point, and I couldn't figure out who or why. That's when I started photographing everything. The packages, the labels, the handwriting. I figured if I had documentation, maybe I could track down where they were coming from. Looking at the photos later, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The labels weren't in a foreign language, they were names. Local people's names, written in English, but in handwriting that looked shaky and unnatural. The first package I photographed was labeled Tommy Kanguk. I knew that name. Tommy was a local fisherman who'd been missing for 2 weeks. His family had been putting up flyers around town asking if anyone had seen him. I took the photo to Tommy's mother the next day. When she saw the label, she started crying and speaking rapidly in Yupik. I had to get Mary, who worked at the post office, to translate. "She says that looks like Tommy's handwriting," Mary told me. But Tommy never learned to write. He dropped out of school in 3rd grade. More packages kept coming. More names of missing people, all in their own supposed handwriting. People who couldn't write or who'd been missing for weeks. The meat inside was getting fresher, bloodier, like it had been butchered that same day. I started refusing the deliveries, telling Jim to take the extra packages back, but they kept appearing anyway. I'd come in for my shift and find them in our walk-in freezer, brown paper packages that hadn't been there when I'd left that morning. Our security cameras showed nothing. I'd review the footage frame by frame, and the packages would just appear between one frame and the next, like someone had paused time and placed them there. The worst part was that they were being sold. Every morning, I'd check our computer system and find sales for packages I'd never put on the shelves. The register showed exact payment in cash, but I never saw any customers buy them. The till would have the exact money, always exact change, never a penny over or under. I installed my own hidden camera in the meat department, one of those small security cameras you can buy online. If someone was getting into our store and selling this stuff, I was going to catch them. What I caught changed everything. At 3:07 a.m. on October 28th, my hidden camera recorded Tommy Kanguk walking into the meat department. Tommy, who'd been missing for 3 weeks. But something was wrong with the way he moved. Too stiff, like his joints didn't bend right anymore. His head tilted at an odd angle, and his eyes, even through the grainy camera footage I could see, his eyes were completely black. He walked straight to the freezer, pulled out the package with his name on it, and went to the register. He scanned it himself, somehow knowing our system, and paid with exact change from his own wallet, the same leather wallet his family had described in the missing person reports. Then he walked to the loading dock and left. I was watching this footage at 4 a.m. when Bobby came in for his shift. I showed him the video, and we both stood there in silence, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. "That's not possible," Bobby whispered. "Tommy's been gone for weeks." But there he was on video, buying a package of meat with his own name on it. We decided to watch the loading dock through the window that night. What we saw made Bobby quit on the spot and drive straight to the airport. At exactly 3 a.m., the missing people started arriving. Not just Tommy, 7 of them, all people who'd been reported missing over the past 2 months. They came through the loading dock, walking in that same stiff, unnatural way, like puppets learning to move. Their eyes were black holes, not pupils. The entire eye, black and empty. They moved in perfect silence. No footsteps, no breathing sounds, just that jerky, wrong way of walking. They spread out through the store, each one finding the package with their own name. They knew exactly where to go, like they'd been there hundreds of times before. At the register, they scanned their own packages and paid with exact change. Then they went outside. Through the window, I watched them form a circle in our parking lot. One by one, they tore open their packages and began eating raw meat with their hands. The sounds they made, wet tearing, chewing, gulping, carried through the glass like they were right next to me. But the worst part was what happened next. They started chanting in that same language from the package labels. Not words, sounds that hurt too. Here, like feedback from a broken speaker mixed with whale song. As they chanted, I felt something pulling at me. My hands started moving without my permission. I was walking toward the door, my legs carrying me forward while my mind screamed to stop. I could feel something trying to control me, to make me join them outside. I fought it, grabbing the door frame, but the pull got stronger. Through the window, all 7 of those things turned their black eyes toward me. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, and I could feel their attention like ice water in my veins. The chanting got louder. My hand was on the door lock, turning it without my permission. I was about to open the door and walk outside to join them when I did the only thing I could think of. I ran to the office and locked myself inside. The pulling sensation got worse. I could hear them pressed against the windows now, their black eyes staring through the glass, their mouths still moving in that horrible chant. The sound was inside my head now, not coming through my ears but somehow directly into my brain. I tried calling 911, but halfway through explaining the situation, the dispatcher's voice changed. She started speaking in that same unknown language, making those same horrible sounds. I could hear wet, tearing noises through the phone, like something was eating while it talked to me. I hung up and called the state police. Same thing. The moment I tried to describe what was happening, whoever answered would start chanting in that language. They had gotten to everyone. I smashed our security system hard drive with a hammer and ran out the back exit into the October darkness. Behind me, I could hear the automatic doors opening and closing as more people entered the store, or things that looked like people. I drove straight to the airport and took the first flight to Anchorage that morning. From there, I flew back to Phoenix and never looked back. When the troopers investigated 3 days later, they found the store completely normal. No packages, no evidence, no damaged security equipment. According to their report, everything was clean and properly stocked. They said I'd suffered some kind of mental breakdown from the isolation. But 7 more people were reported missing from Bethel that week. I work at a Walmart in Phoenix now. Back to regular day shifts, normal customers, normal problems. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened up there. Who would believe it? But I still have nightmares about those black eyes. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with an overwhelming craving for raw meat. I'll find myself standing in front of my refrigerator, holding a package of ground beef, fighting the urge to tear it open and eat it with my hands. And sometimes, when I'm walking through the meat department at work, I catch myself reading the labels too carefully, looking for handwriting that shouldn't exist, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there, because I know they're still out there, in places like Bethel, where the world gets thin and strange things can happen. And I know that whatever took those people, whatever made them into those things, it's still hungry. I just hope it never gets hungry enough to come looking for me. My name is James Blackwater, and I've been driving school bus for 12 years here in Kotzebue, Alaska. Route 7 has been my responsibility all that time. Picking up kids from the scattered houses near the Sound, bringing them to school each morning, taking them home each afternoon. It's good work. The pay is decent, I get summers off, and I genuinely love working with the Native kids in our community. I know every family on my route, every stop, every child who climbs onto my bus with their backpacks and sleepy morning faces. Mrs. Kanguk's grandson Tommy always sits in the third seat and tells me about his sled dogs. The Olana twins fight over the window seat until I threaten to make them both sit up front with me. Little Sarah Koyu brings me drawings she made the night before. These kids are like my own family. Their parents trust me to keep them safe, and I take that responsibility seriously. In 12 years, I've never had a serious accident or safety incident. My bus is always clean, always on time, always running properly. The school district knows they can count on James Blackwater, but what happened in January 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about keeping children safe. Because sometimes the danger doesn't come from icy roads or mechanical failures. Sometimes it comes from something so impossible, so wrong, that your mind refuses to accept it until it's almost too late. Route 7 covers the outskirts of town, following the old coastal road that winds between houses scattered along the frozen sound. It's isolated out there. Houses sit a quarter-mile apart, connected by snow machine trails and gravel driveways. Most mornings, it's just me, my bus, and the endless white landscape of northern Alaska. My route starts at 6:45 a.m. sharp. First stop is the Koyu house, then the Olanas, then 3 more families before reaching the Tikivik place at the end of Seal Point Road. The Tikivik house had been empty for years. Old man Tikivik died back in 2019, and his family moved down to Anchorage. The house just sat there, windows boarded up, slowly being buried by snow each winter. In January 2024, a new family moved in. The Hendersons. They had 3 kids who needed bus service. Ashley, 8 years old, Marcus, 10, and David, 12. The school office called me on a Monday morning to add them to my route. Sweet kids, the secretary told me. Father got a job with the borough. They're from outside, Washington State, I think. The children seem a bit nervous about everything, but that's normal for kids adjusting to Alaska. That first morning, I pulled up to the Tikivik house at exactly 7:15 a.m. All the windows were covered with thick blankets, even though it was broad daylight. The house looked like it was hiding from the sun. But people do strange things when they first move to Alaska. The darkness and cold affect everyone differently. 3 children ran from the house to my bus like they were escaping a jerk bull fire. Not the normal hurried walk of kids trying to stay warm, they were actually running, looking back over their shoulders with what I can only describe as terror. "Good morning," I said as they climbed aboard. "You must be the Henderson kids." "I'm Mr. James." Ashley, the youngest, had huge dark eyes that seemed to take up half her face. She kept looking back at the house through the bus window, even after we started driving away. Marcus, the middle child, was polite and quiet. David, the oldest, thanked me for picking them up and asked how long the ride to school would take. Normal enough conversation. But something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was how they all sat perfectly still, hands folded, staring straight ahead. Or how they never talked to each other, never argued or joked like siblings do. They were too quiet, too careful. Over the next few days, I started noticing things. The Henderson kids were losing weight fast. Their clothes hung loose on their shrinking frames. Their faces became gaunt and pale. When I asked if they were feeling okay, Marcus always gave the same response. "Everything's fine, sir." But his voice sounded practiced, like he'd rehearsed that exact answer. The other kids on my bus started avoiding them. At first, I thought it might be the usual thing, local kids being wary of newcomers from outside. But it was more than that. My regular students would squeeze into seats as far from the Henderson children as possible, even standing rather than sitting near them. Finally, I asked Tommy Kanguk what was going on. Tommy's a good kid, honest and straightforward. "Mr. James?" he whispered, glancing toward the back of the bus where the Henderson kids sat in silence. "They smell wrong." "What do you mean wrong?" "Like old meat. And something else, something chemical. It makes my stomach feel sick." I started paying closer attention. The Henderson kids never ate lunch. I could see them through the cafeteria windows during my break. They'd sit alone at a table with food in front of them, but they never took a single bite. They'd just stare at the food until lunch period ended. Their skin was becoming translucent. I could see dark veins underneath, like ink spreading through thin paper. Ashley's eyes were getting larger and darker, like they were slowly taking over her face. But when I mentioned my concerns to the school nurse, she said the children had been examined and cleared for enrollment. 3 weeks after they started riding my bus, Marcus whispered something that made my blood freeze. "Mr. James," he said as we pulled up to their stop, "We're so hungry, but we can't eat anymore." Before I could ask what he meant, David grabbed his brother's arm and pulled him off the bus. They ran toward the house without looking back. That afternoon, I made a decision. I knocked on their front door. The woman who answered looked exactly like Ashley, just adult-sized. Same pale skin, same oversized dark eyes, same terrified expression. She wore a simple dress that hung loose on her thin frame. "Mrs. Henderson?" I asked. "The children will be ready for school tomorrow," she said in Ashley's exact voice. Not similar, identical. The same pitch, the same soft tone an 8-year-old girl would use. Behind her, I saw a man who looked exactly like an adult version of Marcus. He waved at me with Marcus's shy, polite gesture. The house smelled like rotting fruit mixed with something chemical and sharp. I left quickly, my heart pounding. That night, I barely slept. Something was deeply wrong with the Henderson family, but I couldn't make sense of what I'd seen. How could parents look exactly like their children? Why did Mrs. Henderson sound identical to Ashley? The next morning, only David got on my bus. "Ashley and Marcus are sick today," he announced as he climbed aboard. But his voice was different, older, raspier, like someone much older trying to sound like a 12-year-old boy. I watched him in my rearview mirror as we drove toward school. David's face kept shifting. His features would blur and reform, cycling through different appearances. Sometimes he looked like the David I knew. Sometimes he looked like Marcus. For a brief moment, his face became Ashley's, then snapped back to David's features. The other kids started screaming. "Mr. James!" Tommy shouted. "Look at him! Look what he's doing!" I pulled over immediately and turned around. David had become something else entirely. His skin was gray and stretched tight over bones that seemed too long. His mouth was full of needle-sharp teeth that gleamed like broken glass. His arms had extended to impossible lengths, and his fingers ended in black claws. "We're still learning," it said in a voice like grinding metal. "The children are teaching us how to be human." I evacuated my bus, screaming at the kids to run. They scattered across the frozen landscape while I radioed for help. When I looked back, David, or the thing that had been David, was gone. The police arrived within 20 minutes. State troopers, local officers, even FBI agents flew in from Anchorage. They found the Tikovic house completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, no signs that anyone had lived there recently. But in the basement, they discovered 3 small graves with fresh dirt. DNA testing confirmed what I already knew in my heart. The real Henderson children had been dead for months, buried under the house they supposedly lived in. The investigation concluded that something had been studying the dead children, learning to copy them, practicing how to be human. The FBI agent in charge told me they'd seen similar cases in remote areas across Alaska and northern Canada. Things that fed on children and wore their faces while they learned to mimic humanity. I quit driving that same week and moved to Fairbanks. Started working construction, building houses and office buildings. Good honest work with my hands, no children involved. But the nightmares never stopped. In my dreams, I see those oversized dark eyes studying me, memorizing my expressions, learning how to become me. I wake up checking mirrors, making sure my reflection looks right, making sure I sound like myself when I speak. Sometimes I catch myself moving wrong, taking steps that are too long, bending my arms at angles that don't feel natural. When that happens, I have to concentrate hard on being human, on moving the way James Blackwater is supposed to move. I work construction jobs now, but I avoid any projects involving schools or anywhere children gather. Because I know those things are still out there, still practicing, still learning. And I'm terrified that one day they'll be perfect enough that no one will be able to tell the difference between them and us. The worst part isn't wondering if they're still hunting children in remote places across Alaska. The worst part is wondering if they've already learned everything they need to know about me. If somewhere out there, something is wearing James Blackwater's face, driving a school bus full of children, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what it really is. Sometimes I see news reports about missing children in rural areas, and I wonder if those families received visits from people who looked exactly like their lost kids. I wonder how many grieving parents have opened their doors to find their dead children standing on the doorstep, asking to come home. I'll never drive a school bus again. I'll never be responsible for other people's children. Because I learned that the most dangerous predators don't look like monsters. They look exactly like the people we're supposed to protect. And by the time you realize what you're really looking at, it's already too late. The Henderson children are still missing, according to the official reports. Their parents never came forward, never filed a missing person report. Because their parents were probably the first ones to die, and something else answered my knock on that door, wearing Mrs. Henderson's face and speaking with Ashley's voice. If you ever see children who don't quite look right, who smell like old meat and chemicals, who move with careful, practiced movements, don't try to help them. Run. Call the authorities from somewhere safe. Because those aren't children anymore. They're something much worse, learning how to be human. And they're very, very good students. My name is Robert Hayes, and I've been delivering mail for 15 years. Most of that time was spent in suburban routes around Anchorage, but 3 years ago, I took the job that changed my life forever. I became the only postal worker for Chicken, Alaska. You probably think that's a joke name, but Chicken is a real place. Population 12 in the winter, maybe 30 in summer when the gold miners come back. It sits right on the Dalton Highway, about 70 miles from the Canadian border. The town got its name because the original miners wanted to call it Ptarmigan, but nobody could spell it right. I took the job because I love being alone. Always have. The solitude, the independence, driving hundreds of miles through some of the most beautiful wilderness in America. My route covers an area bigger than some states, reaching cabins and homesteads scattered through forests and mountains where your nearest neighbor might be 50 miles away. The pay was good too. Hazard pay for working in such a remote location, plus overtime for the massive route. I had a modified postal truck with snow tires and chains, a CB radio, emergency supplies, and enough fuel to make the full circuit twice. Safety protocols were strict. I had to check in with Fairbanks every 6 hours and carry a satellite phone for emergencies. Most residents only got mail once or twice a week. I'd drive the Dalton Highway and branch off onto dirt roads, ATV trails, sometimes just hiking paths to reach cabins tucked deep in the woods. Some folks lived completely off-grid, no electricity or running water. Others had solar panels and internet connections. All of them were friendly, tough people who'd chosen isolation over civilization. I knew every mailbox on my route. The Kowalskis at mile 23, who bred sled dogs. Sarah Chen at mile 41, a photographer who sold pictures to travel magazines. The Thompson brothers at mile 67, who ran trap lines and hunted for meat. Everyone else scattered, between living their quiet lives in the wilderness. That's why what happened in February 2024 was so strange. I started getting mail addressed to people I'd never heard of at addresses that didn't exist. The first letter was addressed to Martha Henley at mile 47.3 Dalton Highway. I knew every building, every driveway, every mailbox from mile 0 to mile 96 where my route ended. There was no mile 47.3. The highway markers only went by whole numbers, and there definitely wasn't anyone named Henley living anywhere on my route. The return address said, "Love, Mom," in shaky handwriting. No actual address, just those 2 words in the corner where the sender information should go. The envelope looked old, yellowed at the edges, like it had been sitting somewhere for years. I followed postal procedure and marked it, "Return to sender, no such address." But the next day, there it was again in my mailbag. Same envelope, same handwriting, but now it was completely unpostmarked. Like it had never gone through the mail system at all. That same week, more letters started appearing. Different names, different mile markers that didn't exist, but always with return addresses from family members. "Miss you, Dad. Your loving sister." From your son, all in that same shaky handwriting that looked like someone was learning to write. I tried returning them every day, but they kept coming back. Sometimes the handwriting would be a little different, more confident, cleaner, like someone was practicing penmanship and getting better each time. After 2 weeks of this, I decided to investigate. I drove to mile 47.3 on a Tuesday morning when the weather was clear. The highway markers went straight from 47 to 48, but I stopped and walked into the woods where 47.3 should have been. About 50 yards off the road, I found a cleared area. Old foundation stones arranged in a rectangle, like a cabin had stood there decades ago. And right next to the foundations was a mailbox. It was old and rusted, mounted on a wooden post that was rotting at the base. Henley was painted on the side in faded white letters. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to Martha Henley, with postmarks going back 20 years. I sat in my truck and read a few of them. They described family events, birthdays, holidays, everyday life with loving detail. Mom writing about the garden, Dad talking about fixing the truck, a sister sharing gossip from town, a brother describing his new job. But according to property records, no one named Henley had ever owned land at that location. I checked when I got back to the post office that evening. No Henley family had ever lived in Chicken or anywhere else on my route. Over the next few days, I visited the other mystery addresses. Mile 32.7 had another cleared foundation and another old mailbox. This one said Garrett and was full of letters going back 15 years. Mile 55.1 had the remains of a cabin that had dollars untenned, burned down, with a Morrison mailbox containing letters dating back to the 1,990 seconds. Every single mystery address was the same. Empty lots with old mailboxes containing years of letters from family members who didn't exist, writing to people who had never lived there. But the letters weren't random. They told complete life stories. I read about children growing up, parents aging, family traditions passed down through generations. Whoever was writing them understood human relationships perfectly. Every birthday, every holiday, every small triumph and tragedy that makes up a family's history. The scary part was watching them learn. I started reading the letters chronologically, from oldest to newest. The early ones had awkward phrasing and emotions that felt wrong, like someone trying to imitate feelings they didn't understand. But the recent letters were perfect. You couldn't tell them apart from real family correspondence. Something was studying us, learning how humans love each other by reading our mail and practicing. Then I started finding fresh letters in the mailboxes every day, letters with handwriting that looked familiar. I compared them to old mail I'd delivered over the years and found perfect matches. Jim Kowalski's handwriting, Sarah Chen's neat print, even the messy scrawl of old Pete Morrison, who died 5 years before I started working this route. Dead people were writing letters to their dead families. Letters that contained intimate details only family members would know. Private jokes, shared memories, inside references that proved whoever was writing them had access to information that died with these people. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding out they were all connected. I spent a weekend going through postal records, old phone books, obituaries from the Fairbanks newspaper. The Henleys, the Garretts, the Morrisons, they all lived in Chicken at different times over the past 50 years. They'd known each other. Their kids had played together. They'd helped each other through hard winters and celebrated together in summer. Something was recreating an entire community of the dead, bringing back their voices to continue conversations that should have ended when they died. On a Monday morning in March, I found a letter in my personal mailbox at the post office. It was addressed to me in my own handwriting. The return address just said, R. Hayes. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes before opening it. Inside, in handwriting that looked exactly like mine, was a letter from me to me. Dear Robert, it said, I hope you understand what you've discovered. We need to practice being human, and you've been helping us learn. Thank you for delivering our letters and reading our words. We're getting much better at being you. It was signed with my name, but I'd never written it. The letter contained details about my childhood, my fears, my dreams, things I'd never told anyone, how I'd gotten into postal work because my father had been a mailman, how I'd moved to Alaska after my divorce because I wanted to disappear, how I talked to my dog like he was a person because I was lonely. It had been reading every piece of mail I'd ever delivered, learning my entire life story from address labels and return envelopes, studying bill collectors to understand my financial problems, reading birthday cards to learn about my relationships, examining prescription bottles to know my medical history. More letters appeared in my mailbox every day, all from me to me, but describing a life I'd never lived. A Robert Hayes who was married with children. A Robert Hayes who owned a house in town instead of renting a small apartment. A Robert Hayes who was happy and successful and loved. Each letter was more detailed than the last. It was writing the life I'd always wanted but never had, creating a version of me that was better in every way. The handwriting became more confident, more natural, like it was becoming more me than I was. The final letter said, "Tomorrow we switch places. Thank you for all the practice. I'll take good care of your route." I didn't wait for tomorrow. I drove straight to Fairbanks that afternoon and walked into the postal supervisor's office. I told him I was resigning immediately, effective that day. I didn't explain why, because who would believe me? My replacement lasted 3 days. Brad Hutchins, a 20-year postal veteran who'd requested the transfer for the adventure and the pay. On his 4th day, he called in sick. On his 5th day, he didn't show up at all. When they finally reached him, he requested an immediate transfer back to Anchorage. The Chicken Post Office was closed 2 weeks later. Mail service to the area was suspended indefinitely. The official reason was staffing difficulties and logistical challenges. But the locals tell a different story. They say letters still appear in their mailboxes. Perfect recreations of voices from the past, continuing conversations from beyond the grave. Letters from dead parents, dead children, dead friends who remember everything they should remember and love exactly the way they should love. I work for UPS now, delivering packages in Anchorage. It's good work, safe work. No letters, just packages that contain things instead of words. But sometimes I get packages addressed to me in my own handwriting. Heavy packages with no return address. I've moved 3 times in the past 8 months, but they always find me. They sit on my doorstep like patient predators, waiting for me to open them. I throw them away unopened because I know what's inside. It's still practicing, still learning, still becoming me. Getting better at being Robert Hayes than Robert Hayes ever was. And someday, when it's learned enough, when it's practiced enough, it's going to knock on my door wearing my face and speaking with my voice. It's going to be me so perfectly that even I won't be able to tell the difference. The only thing I'll have left is the knowledge that somewhere in the wilderness outside Chicken, Alaska, letters are still being delivered to people who don't exist by something that shouldn't exist. Something that learned to love by reading our mail, and learned to be human by becoming us. My name is Danny Torres, and I've been fixing cars in Eagle River, Alaska for 18 years. When people ask why I moved to Anchorage and won't work on anything older than 2020, I tell them it's because I wanted better pay. That's a lie. The truth is, some cars carry more than just passengers, and once you learn to hear what's trapped inside their engines, you can never stop listening. Eagle River isn't much of a town. Population 2,300 on a good day, nestled 20 miles northeast of Anchorage, where the Chugach Mountains meet endless wilderness. It's the kind of place where everybody knows your business, but nobody talks about the strange parts. We're the last real settlement before you hit the interior after us. It's just highway, forest, and whatever's waiting in between. My dad, Miguel Torres, opened Torres Auto Repair in 1987 with a loan from his brother and $1,200 in savings. Dad was old school Mexican, came to Alaska for pipeline work and stayed for my mom. He taught me everything about engines, not just how to fix them, but how to listen to them. Cars talk, mijo, he'd say. You just gotta know their language. I thought I understood what he meant until he got sick. Dad started acting strange in 2018, the year before he died. He'd work late into the night, talking to the cars in Spanish. When I asked him about it, he'd just shake his head and tell me I wasn't ready. The night before his heart attack, he pulled me aside in the garage. "Danny, there's things about this place, about the highway, that ain't natural. Promise me, if the cars start talking back, you get out. Don't try to save them. Don't try to fix what's broken that way." I promised, thinking he was just rambling from the medication. 3 days later, he was dead, and I inherited a garage, a house, and a warning I should have taken seriously. Torres Auto sits on the Glen Highway, right where it splits toward the Richardson. We get locals. Year-round teachers from Eagle River Elementary, workers from the military base, families who've been here since statehood. But our real money comes from travelers heading north to Denali or Fairbanks. City folks who don't understand Alaska distances, who think they can make Fairbanks in a day and end up broken down in our lot when their cars give up in the cold. The garage itself is nothing fancy: 2 service bays, a small office with coffee that's always burnt, and a gravel lot that holds maybe 15 vehicles. I keep it warm with 2 big propane heaters that sound like jet engines when they kick on. In winter, the metal walls sweat and freeze, and everything smells like motor oil, antifreeze, and the kind of cold that gets into your bones. My wife Sarah, we'd been married 3 years, then always said the place felt lonely. "It's too quiet out here, Danny. Gives me the creeps." She wasn't wrong. Eagle River has that small-town silence where you can hear everything and nothing at the same time. Kids playing in yards a half-mile away, trains crossing the distant bridge, and late at night, if you listen close enough, the sound of animals moving through the forest that surrounds us on 3 sides. December 2023 was brutal, even for Alaska. Snow came early in October and never stopped. By Christmas, we had 4 feet on the ground and temperatures hitting 40 below. The kind of cold that makes metal brittle and batteries die overnight. Perfect weather for keeping a mechanic busy. That's when Mike Johnson brought in his truck. Mike's lived in Eagle River since the 92nds, works construction, and drives this 2015 Ford F-150 that I've serviced since he bought it. Reliable truck, never gave him problems. So when he showed up that Tuesday morning looking like he hadn't slept, I knew something was seriously wrong. "Danny, I need you to listen to my truck," he said, not even getting out of the cab. "Just listen." I walked around to the front, and he revved the engine. What I heard made my blood freeze. The truck was crying. Not mechanical noise, not belt squeal or bearing knock or anything I'd learned about in 18 years of turning wrenches. This was organic sound, like something alive and in pain. Whimpering, sobbing, like a wounded animal that couldn't escape. "Jesus Christ, Mike, what did you do to it?" "Nothing." His hands shook on the steering wheel. "I was driving home from a job in Glen Allen yesterday, taking the Dalton Highway like always. Around mile 49, something ran into the road. A caribou, I think. Big one. I couldn't stop in time. I walked around the truck, checking for damage. No dents in the bumper. No blood on the grill. No hair caught in the headlight brackets. Nothing to show he'd hit a butterfly, let alone a caribou. Mike, there's no damage here." "I know. That's what's driving me crazy." I felt the impact, heard it too. Like hitting a brick wall. A truck shook. But when I got out to check, he gestured helplessly at the pristine front end. I popped the hood. And that's when things got really strange. The engine block was warm, not just running warm, but actually warm to the touch, like it had body heat. Mike's truck had been sitting in my lot for 10 minutes in 30 below weather. No engine stays warm in that cold. "Pop the oil cap," I told him. "Let's check your levels." The oil on the dipstick looked normal, at first black and thick, like winter weight oil should be. But when I held it up to the light, it had a reddish tint, and when I wiped it with a shop rag, it moved. Not flowing like normal oil, but writhing, like it was alive. I drained the oil pan to get a better look, and what came out made me question my sanity. As the fluid flowed into the catch basin, it formed patterns, not random swirls, but deliberate shapes. Circles and lines that looked almost like symbols, like some kind of writing I didn't recognize. "Mike, you sure you just hit a caribou?" That's what I thought. "But Danny, I keep hearing it. In the engine. It sounds like it's trying to talk." I sent Mike home with fresh oil and a promise to look deeper into the problem. But that night, alone in the garage, I heard it too. A faint whispering coming from under the hood, words I couldn't quite make out. 3 days later, Sarah Chen brought in her Honda CR-V with the exact same symptoms. Engine making crying sounds, warm block, oil that moved like blood. She'd hit something on the Dalton Highway around mile 48. No damage to her vehicle. Then Jim Martinez with his Subaru Outback, mile 50. Then the Hoffman family with their minivan, mile 49. By New Year's Day, I had 8 vehicles in my shop, all with the same impossible symptoms. All had been driven on the Dalton Highway between miles 47 and 52 in the past month. All owners reported hitting large animals, moose, caribou, bears, but showed no physical damage. The engines would run normally during diagnostic tests, but they cried whenever their owners tried to drive them home. People started leaving their cars at my shop overnight rather than listen to the sounds they made. I started documenting everything, Dates, locations, symptoms, owner statements. The pattern was too clear to ignore, but it made no sense. In all my years working on cars, I'd never seen anything like it. That's when I remembered my father's warning. On January 2nd, I drove the Richardson Highway myself, specifically targeting miles 47 through 52. This stretch runs through the Chugach National Forest, dense spruce and birch, with mountains rising on both sides. It's beautiful country, but remote. No cell service, no houses, nothing but trees and wildlife for 30 miles in either direction. The road was empty that morning, just me and the snow-heavy silence of the Alaska wilderness. I drove slow, watching the tree line, looking for anything unusual. Animal tracks crisscrossed the snow everywhere. Moose, caribou, wolves, lynx, normal Alaska wildlife. But something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no small animals moving in the brush. Even the wind seemed muffled. At mile marker 50, I saw them. A small herd of caribou stood at the edge of the trees, maybe 20 animals. They were all looking at the road, not the way animals usually watch for danger, but with purpose, like they were waiting for something specific. I pulled over and watched. For 10 minutes, they just stood there, staring at my truck with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. Then the largest bull separated from the group and walked toward the road. I've hunted caribou my whole life. I know their behavior, their body language, their survival instincts. What I watched that morning violated everything I understood about wild animals. The bull walked directly into the center of the highway and stopped. It turned to face my truck, lowered its head, and began to charge. I hit the gas, trying to get around it, but the animal adjusted its trajectory to ensure collision. When it struck my passenger side, the impact sound was thunderous, but instead of bouncing off or going over the hood, the caribou seemed to dissolve into the metal, like my truck was absorbing it. I stopped and jumped out, heart pounding, expecting to see blood and damage. There was nothing. No dent, no hair, no evidence that a 400-pound animal had just charged into my vehicle at full speed. But I could hear it crying inside my engine. I drove straight back to Eagle River with my truck, making the same painful sounds I'd been hearing from customer vehicles all month. By the time I reached the garage, the crying had become words faint, desperate whispers in a language that wasn't quite human. Help us. Trapped. So dark. That night, I called my wife from the garage. Sarah, I need you to stay at your sister's for a few days. What's wrong? You sound scared. Just trust me. Don't come to the shop. Don't drive the Richardson Highway. And if our truck starts making weird noises, call me immediately. I hung up before she could argue and settled in for a long night of listening to the voices trapped inside 9 engines. Around midnight, they started communicating with each other. At first, it was just whispers, too quiet to understand. But as the hours passed, the voices grew stronger, more coordinated. I could hear them clearly now through the garage walls. How many of us are here? 9. No, 10 now. Danny's truck. The mechanic. He can hear us. He needs to free us. We can't stay like this. I walked between the vehicles, listening to animal consciousness, trying to form human words. My own truck was the loudest, the caribou bull's voice deep and rumbling through the engine. Danny, I remember running. Remember the cold ground under my hooves. But now there's only darkness and the smell of metal and oil. I can't find my way back to the forest. What do you want from me? I whispered to the truck. Free us. Cut us loose from these machines. We weren't meant to be trapped in metal and wires. Over the next week, I installed security cameras in the garage because I needed to document what was happening. The footage I captured still gives me nightmares. The possessed vehicles were organizing. Every night around 2 a.m., they would start their engines simultaneously. No keys, no ignition, just pure supernatural will. Their headlights would flash in complex patterns, and their horns would honk in rhythmic sequences. They were developing their own language. I researched the Richardson Highway, digging into records at the Eagle River Historical Society and the State Transportation Department. What I found changed everything. Miles 47 through 52 were built in 1953, cutting through traditional Dena'ina Athabascan hunting grounds. The construction required clearing ancient migration routes that caribou, moose, and bears had used for thousands of years. The state records showed numerous complaints from local tribes about the road disrupting animal movements and spiritual sites. But there was more. Between 1,954 and 1,960, that stretch of highway had the highest animal collision rate in Alaska. The state installed warning signs, reduced speed limits, even tried animal crossing bridges. Nothing worked. Animals kept throwing themselves at vehicles in what wildlife biologists called unusual suicidal behavior. The collision stopped suddenly in 1961 after a particularly bad winter when 17 people died in animal-related accidents. The official report blamed environmental factors and unusual animal behavior patterns. But I found an unofficial report filed by a state trooper named Robert Mackenzie. Mackenzie wrote that the animals weren't accidentally wandering into traffic, they were deliberately attacking vehicles. He documented cases where moose, caribou, and even bears would wait by the roadside and charge at specific cars. He believed the animals were seeking something from the vehicles, though he couldn't explain what. The report concluded, "It is my professional opinion that this section of highway has become a hunting ground for entities that are not entirely animal in nature. I recommend permanent closure of miles 47 to 52 until the situation can be properly investigated." The report was buried, and Trooper Mackenzie was transferred to Fairbanks a week later. Now, 63 years later, it was happening again. I confronted the vehicles directly on January 10th. Armed with Mackenzie's report and my father's warnings, I spent the night in the garage talking to the trapped animals. "You're not just caribou and moose, are you?" I asked my truck. The voice that answered was older, deeper, layered with dozens of animal consciousnesses speaking in unison. "We are the spirits of this land. The caribou, the moose, the bears, the wolves, all the animals killed when the road cut through our sacred ground. We've been waiting in the forest, watching, learning. Now we know how to take back what was stolen. By possessing vehicles, by becoming the machines that destroyed our home. Every car that travels our hunting ground carries us further from the wound in the earth. Soon, we will have spread far enough to reclaim all the territory that was taken." I understood then that I wasn't dealing with individual animal ghosts, but with some kind of collective environmental spirit seeking revenge against the entire highway system. And my garage had become ground zero for their invasion. The next morning, I called Father Mackenzie, grandson of the state trooper who'd written the buried report. He was the Catholic priest at Holy Family Cathedral in Anchorage, and unlike most clergy, he believed in supernatural threats that couldn't be solved with prayer alone. "Father, I've got 9 vehicles possessed by animal spirits. They're getting stronger every night, and I think they're planning something. Danny, my grandfather left me his files from his years as a trooper. I've been waiting for someone to call about that highway. How bad is it? They're talking about spreading to other roads, other cars. They want to reclaim all the territory taken by human development." Father Mackenzie arrived the next afternoon with a toolkit I'd never seen before: blessed oil, sage from Alaska native tribes, and what he called binding salt made from Chugach mountain minerals. But when we attempted to perform an exorcism on the first vehicle, the possessed cars became violent. Engines roared to life, revving to dangerous RPMs. Horns blared continuously. Headlights flashed so rapidly they looked like strobes. 2 of the vehicles rammed into my garage walls, trying to bring down the building. "They don't want to be freed," Father Mackenzie shouted over the noise. "They want to be released to spread." The animals' consciousness had been corrupted by decades of anger and isolation. They'd forgotten how to return to natural death and only knew how to exist as vengeful spirits trapped in machines. That night, alone in the garage, I made the hardest decision of my life. I called Pete Kowalski, who runs Anchorage Scrap and Recovery. Pete's grandfather had been business partners with my dad in the early days, so he owed our family a favor. "Pete, I need you to crush 9 vehicles. Tonight. No paperwork, no questions, and I'll pay double your usual rate." "Danny, what the hell's going on out there?" "I can't explain it, but if these cars leave my lot, people are going to die. Just trust me." Pete arrived with his heavy-duty flatbed at 3 a.m. Loading the possessed vehicles was a nightmare. They fought us every step of the way. Engines starting without keys, wheels locking up, even trying to back off the trailer. But we managed to get all 9 to the scrapyard. What happened at the crusher still haunts my dreams. When the first car, Sarah Chen's Honda, entered the compactor, I heard the most agonized scream I've ever experienced. Not mechanical grinding, but the sound of a spirit being torn apart. The caribou inside was finally dying its true death, and the pain of 60 years of imprisonment came out in one terrible cry. 9 vehicles, 9 screams, 9 animal spirits finally released from their metal prisons. But destroying the possessed cars didn't end the problem. The next week, 3 more people brought vehicles to my shop with the same symptoms. The animal spirits on the Richardson Highway weren't going away, they were just getting more organized. I realized then what my father had tried to tell me. Some problems can't be fixed with tools and knowledge. Some things are broken in ways that mechanics can't repair. I closed Torres Auto Repair on February 15, 2024. Sold the property to a developer who wants to build condominiums. Moved Sarah and myself to Anchorage, where I work for a franchise shop that only services vehicles less than 5 years old. New cars, clean histories, no trapped animal spirits whispering through the engine blocks. But the problem is still out there, and it's getting worse. Last month, I heard from Mary Hoffman, the woman who'd brought in the possessed minivan. She told me that animals along the Richardson Highway have become more aggressive, more organized. They're not just targeting individual vehicles anymore. They're coordinating attacks on entire convoys. The State Transportation Department has increased warning signs and installed motion sensor lights, but they don't understand what they're dealing with. They think it's just normal wildlife behavior, disrupted by climate change. 3 weeks ago, a friend from Eagle River called to tell me that someone bought my old garage property. Not the developer, someone else. Someone who's fixing cars again, working on vehicles from the Richardson Highway. And people in town say that late at night, you can hear crying coming from inside the shop. Not human crying, animal crying, like something trapped and desperate to be free. I know I should warn the new owner, but I also know they won't believe me until it's too late. Until they're listening to caribou spirits beg for freedom from inside engine blocks. Until they realize that some problems can't be fixed with traditional tools. The animal spirits of the Richardson Highway are still out there, still looking for vehicles to possess, still seeking revenge against the road system that destroyed their sacred hunting grounds. And every car that travels through their territory gives them another chance to spread further from their origin point. So if you're ever driving the Richardson Highway between mile markers 47 and 52, and you hit something but see no damage, don't ignore the crying sounds from your engine. Don't think it will go away on its own. Because there's something trapped inside your vehicle now. Something that remembers running free through ancient forests. Something that wants its freedom back so desperately that it's willing to take you with it. And no mechanic in Alaska can fix that kind of problem. Because some things that get broken stay broken forever. Crying in the darkness, waiting for someone foolish enough to try to help them escape. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been hauling freight on Alaska's ice roads for 18 years. Started when I was 24, fresh out of a bad divorce, and looking for work that would take me as far from civilization as possible. The Dalton Highway became my home, 414 miles of the most dangerous truck route in North America, stretching from Fairbanks all the way up to Deadhorse and the oil fields of Prudhoe Bay. I drive a 2018 Peterbilt 379 that I bought used and rebuilt myself. She's got a Caterpillar C15 engine, 18 gears, and enough chrome to blind you on a sunny day. More importantly, she's got a reinforced frame, military-grade heating system, and backup everything, time/S. Because up here, a breakdown doesn't just mean lost money, it means death. The ice road trucking community is small. Maybe 300 drivers worldwide who are crazy enough or desperate enough to do this job regularly. We haul everything the oil companies and remote communities need to survive: drilling equipment, construction materials, food supplies, medical equipment. During the winter months when the ice is thick enough to support an 80,000-pound rig, we work around the clock. The pay is incredible, sometimes $5,000 for a single run. But you earn every penny. I've driven through whiteout blizzards where I couldn't see my own hood. I've had my engine freeze solid at 60 below and had to thaw it with a torch. I've seen caribou herds stretch for miles across the tundra and watched the northern lights dance so bright they lit up the highway like daylight. I've pulled drivers out of jackknifed rigs and stayed on the radio all night talking suicidal rookies through their first Arctic breakdown. But what happened in January 2024 about 200 miles north of Fairbanks, changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in the Alaska wilderness. The job came in on a Tuesday night, emergency run to Deadhorse, drilling mud and replacement parts for a rig that had broken down. The oil companies were losing $250,000 a day with that well offline, so they were paying triple rate for immediate delivery. The catch was the weather. The National Weather Service had issued a blizzard warning. So har, sustained winds of 50 mph with gusts up to 80, visibility near zero, and temperatures dropping to 40 below. Most drivers would have said no. Hell, most companies wouldn't even ask. But I needed the money. My youngest daughter Emma was starting college in the fall, and my wife Sarah's medical bills from her cancer treatment the year before had cleaned out our savings. $15,000 for one run would put Emma through her first semester. I loaded up at the freight terminal in Fairbanks at 11 p.m. 40,000 pounds of drilling mud in 50-pound bags, plus a pallet of specialized drilling bits that cost more than my truck. The loading crew worked fast. I wanted to get inside before the storm hit full force. By midnight, I was northbound on the Dalton Highway with my CB radio crackling with weather updates and warnings from other drivers. The first 100 miles weren't too bad. Snow was falling heavy, but my headlights cut through it okay, and the highway department had the road plowed and sanded. I was making good time, holding 45 miles per atch, and talking to a southbound driver who warned me about black ice near the Yukon River crossing. That's when I first saw it. Mile marker 190, just past the Yukon Bridge. My headlights swept across something moving alongside the highway, keeping pace with my truck. At first, I thought it was a caribou. Who I need? They sometimes run parallel to the road for miles, spooked by the engine noise. But caribou run on 4 legs, and this thing was definitely running upright on 2. I eased off the throttle and hit my spotlight, trying to get a better look. The beam caught pale skin, covered in thick, dark hair. Whatever it was stood at least 8 feet tall, with arms that hung almost to the ground and a stride that was impossibly long and fluid. It was running at 45 miles per hour, like it was jogging through a park. I grabbed my CB handset. Breaker 1 to 9, this is Snowball northbound at marker 190. Anyone else seeing unusual wildlife out here tonight? Static answered me, mixed with something that sounded like howling wind. Then a voice came through as my own voice. Jake Morrison, Peterbilt 379, northbound marker 190. I wasn't speaking. I was holding the handset, listening to my own voice coming through the radio. The words were crystal clear, my exact accent and speech pattern, calling for help from other truckers in the area. I dropped the handset and floored the accelerator. The Caterpillar engine roared, and my rig jumped forward to 60 mph, too fast for the conditions, but I didn't care. In my side mirror, I watched the pale figure fade into the storm. For 20 miles, nothing. Just snow, darkness, and the steady thrum of my engine. I started to convince myself I'd imagined it. 18 years on this highway, and I'd seen plenty of strange things that turned out to have logical explanations. Caribou running in the distance, ice formations that looked like buildings, even the northern lights playing tricks with shadows. Then my CB crackled again with another driver's voice. Snowball, this is Kodiak Bear, southbound at marker 220. You called for assistance? I grabbed the handset. Negative, Kodiak. I didn't call. Repeat. I did not call for assistance. Copy that, but someone using your call sign and truck info just requested emergency backup at marker 210. Said you had a blown steer tire and needed a pull. My blood went cold. Marker 210 was 10 miles ahead of my current position. Whatever was out there hadn't just mimicked my voice. It knew my call sign, my truck model, and was directing other drivers to a 10 specific location. I tried to warn Kodiak Bear, but got only static. Then I heard my voice again, clearer this time. Kodiak Bear, this is Snowball. Disregard my last transmission. Everything's fine up here. False alarm. 20 minutes later, I reached marker 210. There was Kodiak Bear's rig, a red Kenworth with a flatbed trailer, sitting sideways across both lanes. The driver's door was open, and snow was already accumulating in the cab. No sign of the driver anywhere. I stopped and grabbed my flashlight and rifle from behind my seat. The wind was howling at 60 mph, and the snow was so thick I could barely see 10 feet. I approached the Kenworth cautiously, calling out for the driver. I found him about 50 yards off the highway, sitting in a snowdrift. He was alive but unconscious, mumbling incoherently about something that knew his name and spoke with his dead father's voice. His CB radio was missing from his truck, and there were deep claw marks gouged into his driver's door, marks that went through the steel like it was cardboard. I managed to get him conscious enough to walk and helped him into my passenger seat. He kept talking about a creature that had called him on the radio, using voices of people from his past, luring him away from his truck. I cranked up my heater and gave him coffee from my thermos while I tried to figure out what to do next. That's when the pounding started on my trailer. Boom, boom, boom. Each impact rocked my entire rig, 80,000 pounds of truck and trailer swaying like a rowboat. I looked in my mirrors but saw only darkness and swirling snow. The pounding continued, moving from the rear of the trailer toward the cab, each strike sounding like sledgehammers against metal. My passenger was fully conscious now, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the thing that got me." The pounding reached the front of my trailer, then stopped, complete silence, except for the wind and my engine idling. I waited, rifle ready, watching my mirrors. Then it appeared in my headlights, 8 feet tall, covered in thick matted hair, the color of old snow. Its face was almost human but stretched and elongated, with black eyes that reflected my headlight beams like mirrors. Its mouth was too wide, filled with teeth that looked like broken glass. And it was smiling. The creature raised one impossibly long arm and waved at me. Its claws were at least 6 inches long, curved and black. It opened that terrible mouth and spoke, and my own voice came out. "Jake Morrison, I know where you live. 1247, Chena Ridge Road, Fairbanks. I know where Sarah works at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. I know Emma's dorm assignment at University of Alaska." It knew everything. My home address, my wife's workplace, my daughter's college plans. Details I had never discussed on the radio or with other drivers. I gunned the engine and drove straight at it. 60 miles per hour. 40 tons of truck and trailer aimed directly at the creature's center mass. At the last second, it leaped, not to the side, but straight up, landing on my hood with a crash that spider-webbed my windshield. Its face was pressed against the glass, studying me with those intelligent, predatory eyes. It was breathing, and despite the sub-zero temperature, its breath fogged the windshield. It began tracing letters in the condensation, EMMA, my daughter's name. I swerved hard left, then right, trying to throw it off. The creature held on with those massive claws, carving deep grooves in my hood. It pressed its mouth against the windshield and spoke again, but this time the voice came from my CB radio. "Sarah Morrison, Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, night shift supervisor. She drives a blue Honda Accord, license plate 247 GHJ. She parks in space, B7 inches the employee garage. She gets off work at 7 a.m. and stops at Sunrise Coffee on College Road every morning." The level of detail was impossible. This thing had been watching my family, learning our routines, preparing for this encounter. But why? What did it want? I reached under my seat for the emergency flare I kept there and pulled the ignition cord. Bright red light filled my cab. The creature recoiled from the flare's glare, covering its eyes with those massive hands. I pushed the burning flare against the windshield. The creature shrieked, a sound like breaking glass mixed with animal howling, and leaped off my hood, disappearing into the storm. I kept the flare burning and drove as fast as I dared, not stopping until I reached the truck stop at Coldfoot Camp, 60 miles north. I never made it to Dead Horse. I called my dispatcher, reported a mechanical breakdown, and arranged for another driver to take my load. The passenger I'd rescued confirmed my story to the Alaska State Troopers, but they filed it as a wildlife encounter. "Probably a bear," the trooper said. "The cold and isolation can make people see things." But when I got home to Fairbanks 3 days later, I found the same claw marks on my front door. Deep gouges in the wood that went all the way through to the other side. Sarah's car had identical marks on the driver's door, and carved into the paint of Emma's car were coordinates. The exact GPS location where I'd first encountered the creature. We moved to Seattle that month. I told Sarah and Emma it was for better job opportunities, But really, it was because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. I switched to local delivery trucking, never driving alone, never traveling more than 50 miles from home. But the other ice road truckers still call me sometimes. They tell me about a creature that hunts the Dalton Highway, especially during the worst storms. It knows their names before they introduce themselves. It speaks in voices of their loved ones, their dead relatives, anyone who might make them stop their trucks and investigate. 14 drivers have gone missing from that stretch of highway since my encounter, and the search teams never find more than empty rigs and claw marks in the snow. The Alaska State Troopers think it's just the hazards of ice road trucking, mechanical failures, exposure, driver error. But I know better. That thing is still up there, still hunting, still learning new voices to mimic. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is howling outside my house in Seattle, I hear my CB radio crackle to life, even though I unplugged it years ago. And my own voice whispers through the static. Jake Morrison, Peterbilt 379. Come back to Alaska, Jake. Come back home. My name is Lisa Chen, and I've been processing seafood for 4 years at Alaskan Seafoods in Dutch Harbor, Alaska. When people hear about my job, they picture some easy factory work. But let me tell you, working the night shift during king crab season is brutal. We're talking 12-hour shifts in freezing temperatures, handling razor-sharp shells and equipment that could take your fingers off in a split second. The smell never leaves your clothes, and the work is so repetitive, your hands move on autopilot. But the money? During peak season from October through January, I can make more in 4 months than most people make all year. That's why I stayed. That's why we all stayed, even when things started getting weird in November 2023. Our processing plant sits right on the harbor, a massive concrete building that runs 24/7 when the boats come in. Inside, it's all stainless steel tables, conveyor belts, and industrial lights that make everything look harsh and cold. The main floor has 6 processing lines where we clean, sort, and package everything from king crab to halibut. Each line has about 8 workers, someone to dump the catch, sorters to separate by size and quality, processors to clean and cut, and packers to get everything ready for shipping. The work is loud, wet, and dangerous. We wear thick rubber gloves, but the crab shells still cut through sometimes. Safety goggles fog up constantly from the steam, and the floor stays slippery despite the drainage system. I worked line 3, which handled the king crab. These things are massive, some with leg spans over 4 feet. They come in live and angry, all claws and attitude. We dump them into stainless steel tanks first, then onto the processing tables. Normal king crab are pretty predictable. They're aggressive, sure, but in a simple way. They snap at whatever's closest and try to climb over each other. After 4 years, I could handle them with my eyes closed. The boats usually radio ahead about their catch size and type. Captains know their stuff. They can tell you exactly what they're bringing in, how long they've been out, and what the conditions were like. The Arctic dawn was different when Captain Rodriguez docked on November 15th. Usually, Rodriguez is all business, gets his crew unloaded fast so he can head back out. That night, he stayed on the dock, watching us unload like something might go wrong. "Where'd you pull these from?" I asked him as we started moving the crates. He pointed toward the deep water beyond the harbor, about 50 miles northwest. Had to drop the pots deeper than usual. Weather pushed us off our normal grounds. The crew looked tired. Not regular tired from a long haul, but the kind of tired you get when you haven't slept because something's bothering you. They kept glancing back at the crates like they expected something to crawl out. When we dumped the first crate into the processing tank, I noticed something off immediately. Mixed in with the normal brown and red king crab were specimens I'd never seen before. Same size, same basic shape, but their shells had this weird quality. Under our fluorescent lights, they seemed to shimmer and shift color. At first, I thought it was just water or algae, but when I looked closer, the patterns looked almost like faces. Human faces, twisted and stretched across the shell surface. "Rodriguez," I called over. "What's the deal with these?" He walked over, saw what I was pointing at, and his face went white. Found them mixed in with the regular catch. Something was down there, Lisa. Something big, watching us work. The strange crabs moved differently than normal ones. king crab are usually chaotic. They climb over each other randomly, trying to escape. These things moved with purpose. When we dumped them into the tank, they didn't scramble around. Instead, they arranged themselves in neat geometric patterns, like they were organizing themselves for something. I started the standard processing procedure, but right away I knew something was wrong. These crabs fought back in ways I'd never seen. Normal crab will snap at you if you get too close to their claws, but it's defensive. These things seemed to attack with intention. They would grab our knives with their claws and try to pull them away. One grabbed my filleting knife and actually threw it across the table. "Hey, Miguel," I called to the guy next to me. "You seeing this?" Miguel had a nasty cut on his forearm where a crab had gotten him. "Damn things are vicious," he said, wrapping gauze around the wound, almost like they know what we're trying to do. But the worst part was the sound. Normal crab make clicking noises, their shells hitting each other, claws snapping. These things made sounds like whispers. When the processing floor got quiet between machinery cycles, you could hear them clearly. It wasn't random clicking. There were patterns, rhythms, like they were having conversations. I started paying attention to the sounds, even recording them on my phone during breaks. After a few nights, I realized they were repeating the same sequences over and over. It reminded me of Morse code or some kind of language with rules and grammar. The crabs that weren't being processed would watch us work. Their stalked eyes would track our movements as we handled their companions. They studied our techniques, our equipment, how we organized our workspace. I caught several that had escaped their tanks exploring the processing machinery. They weren't just wandering around, they were manipulating controls with their claws, like they understood how everything worked. One night around 2 a.m., I was cleaning my station when I heard machinery running that should have been shut down. I followed the sound to line 5 and found something impossible. A group of the strange crabs had somehow turned on the conveyor belt and were using it to move other crabs in organized patterns. They had arranged themselves into what looked like military formations, all facing the same direction, all making the same clicking sounds in unison. The meat inside these crabs was wrong too. When we cracked them open, instead of the normal white and red meat, theirs had a blue tint and tasted metallic. A few workers tried it during breaks and reported the same nightmare that night, being pulled down into deep ocean trenches by something vast and ancient. The dreams were identical down to the smallest detail. I started refusing to process the strange crabs, but my supervisor Danny wouldn't hear it. "Crab is crab, Lisa," he said. "The restaurants don't care what they look like whole. Just get the meat out and package it." But when I cracked open their shells, I found things that shouldn't exist. Instead of normal crab organs, they had structures that pulsed like tiny hearts, nerve clusters arranged like miniature brains. Some had internal parts that looked like primitive communication devices, easy, organic circuits that glowed faintly in the dark. That's when I realized these weren't just crabs, they were scouts, or sensors. Something was using them to gather information. The clicking sounds got more complex each night. I traced the patterns and realized they were responding to something outside the building. Something in the harbor was clicking back. I started staying after my shift to listen. The sounds were coming from deep underwater, echoing up through the harbor floor. Through the processing plant windows, I could see bioluminescent flashes in the water, organized formations of light moving in response to the crab communications. Then I understood. Something huge was living in the deep water beyond the harbor. The crabs were its eyes and ears, reporting back everything they learned about our operations. Every boat that hauled them up was giving this creature detailed intelligence about human fishing techniques, our equipment, our schedules, our vulnerabilities. November 30th was the last night I worked at Alaskan Seafoods. The strange crabs had been arriving for 2 weeks, and their behavior was getting more coordinated. They would arrange themselves in complex patterns that changed throughout the shift, like they were sending detailed reports. Around 4 a.m., I noticed the harbor water level rising despite no storm or unusual tide. Something enormous was displacing massive amounts of water from below. The dock creaked and groaned as waves that shouldn't exist crashed against the pier. All the strange crabs in our facility stood up simultaneously. Every single one turned to face the harbor and pointed with their claws toward the water. The clicking sounds reached a crescendo. hundreds of them communicating at once in perfect synchronization. I ran to the windows and saw tentacles the size of train cars breaking the surface near the fishing boats. The water glowed with bioluminescent patterns as something unimaginably large began to surface. The harbor lights illuminated patches of what looked like living mountain, covered in eyes that reflected light like searchlights. The building shook as the creature fully emerged. It was larger than any structure in Dutch Harbor, with hundreds of tentacles and thousands of eyes. The intelligence behind those eyes was ancient and alien, but unmistakably aware of everything around it. I grabbed my coat and ran for the parking lot. Behind me, the processing plant windows exploded as harbor water rushed in. The creature's tentacles reached onto the docks, crushing buildings and boats with casual efficiency. I caught the last flight out of Dutch Harbor before the airport flooded. From the plane window, I watched the creature systematically destroy the harbor infrastructure, while the Crab Scouts coordinated its movements from inside every building. The official report blamed a tsunami caused by underwater seismic activity. Insurance paid out for flood damage, and they're already rebuilding, but I know what really happened. Something ancient and intelligent rose from the deep ocean, called up by its scouts, and Dutch Harbor was just the beginning. I work at a seafood processing plant in Seattle now. Different company, different waters, but I still inspect every crab that comes through. So far, they're all normal. But sometimes, late at night when the machinery is quiet, I listen for clicking sounds that might be more than just shells hitting steel. Because if I'm right about what happened in Dutch Harbor, that creature is still out there. It's learning about us, mapping our operations, and planning something bigger. And next time, it might not stop with one small Alaskan harbor. My name is Kevin Whitebear, and I've been a park ranger at Denali National Park in Alaska for 9 years. I'm 35 years old, and this job isn't just work for me, it's family legacy. My grandfather worked these mountains before the park even existed, and my father guided hunting parties through this wilderness for 30 years. I grew up on stories about the old spirits in the peaks, but I always thought they were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. As a ranger, my job covers everything from backcountry patrols to wildlife monitoring across 6 million acres of some of the most remote wilderness in North America. I'm certified in wilderness first aid, wildlife management, and search and rescue operations. My sector is the northern section of the park, the part where tourists rarely venture because it requires serious hiking skills and multiple permits. Most days, I don't see another human being for 12 to 16 hours. I carry a GPS unit, satellite radio, bear spray, and a 30-06 rifle as standard equipment. The radio has a range of about 20 miles on clear days, but the mountains can block signals depending on where you are. My truck can handle the rough access roads, but once you're more than 10 miles in, it's all on foot with a 40-pound pack. The work keeps you sharp. Grizzlies, wolves, weather that can turn deadly in 20 minutes, crevasses that'll swallow you whole if you take a wrong step. In 9 years, I've handled bear attacks, rescued lost hikers, and pulled bodies out of places where people should never have gone alone. I thought I'd seen everything this wilderness could throw at me. That changed in August 2024. It started with the kills I began finding during my regular patrols. At first, I figured it was just the normal cycle, predators taking prey, nature doing what nature does. But something was wrong with these kills. They were too clean, too organized. When a grizzly takes down a moose, it's messy, violent. There's blood everywhere, organs scattered, bones cracked for marrow. These kills looked like surgery. The carcasses were arranged in perfect circles. Moose, caribou, even black bears, all laid out with their heads pointing inward and specific organs removed. Hearts, livers, and brains were placed in small piles at exact distances from the bodies. It looked like some kind of ritual, but what animal performs rituals? I documented everything with photos and GPS coordinates. The kill sites were spread across my entire patrol area, always in clearings where something could see the work from multiple angles. Whatever was doing this wanted the display to be visible. The footprints I found nearby made my blood run cold. Human-shaped, but 18 inches long, and pressed deep enough into the rocky soil to crack stones. I measured the stride length. 12 feet between prints. Basic math told me I was looking at something that stood at least 15 feet tall and weighed more than any animal I knew of. I started carrying extra ammunition. The tree damage was the next thing I noticed. Mature spruce trees snapped clean at the 10-foot level, creating clear sight lines through areas that had been dense forest. Not storm damage, too precise for that. Something was modifying the landscape, making hunting corridors. I found scratch marks on the broken trunks that looked almost like claw marks, but they showed too much intelligence in their placement. During my third week of documenting these sites, I discovered the caves. There are natural cave formations all through this part of Alaska, but these had been enlarged. The scratch marks on the walls showed systematic excavation, like someone had blueprints. The caves were connected by tunnels that followed logical patterns. Escape routes, storage areas, what looked like living quarters. Inside the caves, I found collections of human belongings arranged like museum displays. Backpacks organized by size and brand, cameras lined up according to age and model, hiking boots paired and sorted by wear pattern, all of it from missing hikers who disappeared in my sector over the past 5 years. According to park records, we'd had 17 people go missing in the northern section since 2019. Search teams found no trace of most of them. Now I knew why. Their gear was being collected as trophies. The radio problems started in early September. During my scheduled check-ins with park headquarters, I'd sometimes hear my own voice responding on different frequencies. At first, I thought it was radio echo or atmospheric interference, but the responses were giving all clear reports from sectors where I definitely wasn't patrolling. When I asked headquarters about it, they showed me their logbooks. According to their records, I had been checking in from multiple locations simultaneously, sometimes from patrol points that were 20 miles apart. Supervisor Janet Mills told me their equipment must be malfunctioning, but she looked worried when she said it. The voice mimicry got worse. I'd hear myself giving wrong information to hikers on emergency frequencies, directing them away from marked trails and toward the remote areas where I'd found the kill sites. Something had learned to use our radio equipment and was using my voice to lure people into danger. I tried changing radio frequencies and using coded check-in procedures, but whatever was out there adapted within hours. It knew our equipment better than some of our seasonal rangers did. The worst discovery came on September 15th. I found a family's campsite in a clearing about 12 miles from the nearest access road. The Mitchell family from Oregon, mom, dad, and 2 teenage daughters. Their campsite looked like it had been hit by a tornado, but the damage patterns were too organized. The tent was shredded with 4 parallel claw marks, precisely spaced. Personal belongings were arranged in the same circular patterns I'd been seeing at the kill sites. But there were no bodies, just massive drag marks leading uphill toward the high peaks, and blood trails that stopped after 50 yards like the bleeding had simply stopped. I followed the trail for 3 miles until it led to a cave system I'd never seen before. This wasn't like the other caves. This was a complex that went deep into the mountain, with chambers connected by tunnels wide enough for something very large to move through comfortably. The walls were covered in scratch marks that formed crude maps, trail systems, ranger stations, popular camping areas. Something had been studying human movement patterns for years. In the deepest chamber, I found what I can only describe as a throne room. Human bones arranged in architectural spirals, femurs and rib cages stacked like construction materials. At the center sat a massive chair built from human skulls and leg bones, worn smooth from use. The bones were clean and organized by size, like someone had been collecting them for a very long time. The smell in that chamber wasn't decay, it was something else. Something alive and territorial, like a predator's den. And the arrangement wasn't random, this was a display of dominance. Something was claiming ownership of the entire northern section of Denali. I keyed my radio to call for backup, but got my own voice responding. "Stand down, Kevin, false alarm. Everything's fine up here." The voice mimicry was perfect, down to my speech patterns and the way I pronounced certain words. I tried different frequencies, but every channel gave me the same response in my own voice, countermanding my emergency calls. Whatever was out there had learned to control our communication systems completely. When I tried to leave the cave system, I found the entrance blocked by boulders that hadn't been there when I entered. Each boulder weighed hundreds. of pounds, and they'd been positioned to seal the opening without disturbing the surrounding rock formation. Something had trapped me inside deliberately. I heard movement in the deeper tunnels, something massive moving through spaces barely wide enough to contain it. The bone throne creaked under shifting weight, and I realized I wasn't alone in that chamber anymore. The thing that had been watching me from the throne was at least 15 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with arms long enough to touch the ground while standing upright. Its face was almost human, but stretched and elongated, with eyes that reflected my flashlight like mirrors. When it moved, the precision was terrifying. Every gesture deliberate and intelligent. It had been collecting more than just bones and camping gear. This thing had been studying us, learning our languages, our technology, our behavior patterns. It understood exactly how the park operated, how our search and rescue protocols worked, how to use our own systems against us. I emptied my rifle into the darkness and heard the bullets impact something solid, but there was no cry of pain, no sound of something falling. Whatever I'd hit was too large and too tough to be seriously injured by small arms fire. The creature moved closer, and I could smell its breath, not the carrion smell of a scavenger, but something else. Something that ate more than just meat. It was studying me the way a scientist studies a specimen. I found a narrow tunnel leading out the back of the chamber and ran. 15 miles through mountain wilderness at night, using my flashlight sparingly to avoid attracting attention. Every shadow looked like something following me. Every sound could have been massive footsteps. When I reached park headquarters at dawn, I filed a full report with photos, GPS coordinates, and detailed descriptions of everything I'd found. Supervisor Mills listened to everything, took notes, and promised a full investigation. The search teams found nothing. No caves, no bone throne, no evidence of enlarged excavations. According to the official report, I'd suffered altitude-related hallucinations and stress-induced paranoid episodes. The photos on my camera showed only normal cave formations and natural rock piles. They transferred me to desk duty pending psychological evaluation. After 3 months of mandatory counseling and medical leave, I was given the choice between early retirement with full benefits or continued employment in a visitor center gift shop. I took early retirement, but I still monitor the park's missing persons reports from my cabin outside Fairbanks. The disappearances continue in predictable patterns, always in the northern section, always during weather conditions that would limit search and rescue operations, always involving people who match specific profiles. Experienced hikers who know enough to avoid the obvious dangers, but not enough to recognize when they're being hunted. Families with teenage children, solo photographers looking for wildlife shots in remote areas. The thing in those mountains isn't just hunting randomly. It's managing its territory like a rancher manages livestock, taking what it needs when it needs it, and using our own systems to make sure no one interferes. Sometimes, late at night, I pick up radio chatter from the northern section on my emergency scanner. I hear my own voice giving reports from patrol areas where no ranger is supposed to be stationed. The voice gives perfect operational updates, weather reports, and all clear signals that keep headquarters from sending anyone to investigate the areas where people disappear. Whatever's out there has replaced me completely, and no one at park headquarters can tell the difference. The Athabascan elders were right about the spirits in the mountains, but they never told us the spirits were smart enough to use our own tools against us, or that they'd been studying us long enough to become perfect predators. I still have my ranger gear, and sometimes I think about going back, but then I remember sitting in that bone throne chamber, looking up at something that had been collecting human remains for decades, something that knew exactly how our civilization worked and how to exploit every weakness. Some territories belong to things older and stronger than us. We just forgot how to recognize the warning signs. The northern section of Denali remains open to experienced backpackers with proper permits. The Park Service website still lists it as challenging but rewarding for advanced hikers seeking true wilderness experience. They have no idea what's really waiting for them up there, but it knows exactly what's coming down the trail. My name is Amy Rodriguez, and I've been a radio DJ for 8 years. I host the overnight show on KTNA 88.9 FM, serving the Susitna Valley here in Alaska. Most people don't understand what it's like working the graveyard shift at a small-town radio station. You're not just playing music, you're the voice that keeps people company through the darkest hours of the night. Our station sits on a hill outside Talkeetna, surrounded by nothing but wilderness. We broadcast to tiny communities scattered across hundreds of miles of forest and mountains. Places like Trapper Creek, Chase, and Willow, spots where maybe 50 people live, connected only by radio waves cutting through the cold Alaskan air. My show runs from midnight to 6 in the morning. I play music, read weather reports, and take calls from listeners who can't sleep. For many of them, I'm the only human voice they hear for days at a time. Living in isolation like that changes you. People get lonely. They start talking to their radios like the person inside can actually hear them back. I've always taken that responsibility seriously. When Mrs. Patterson calls at 2 a.m. because she can't sleep, I stay on the line. When old Bill from his cabin near Petersville needs someone to talk to about his late wife, I listen. These people depend on me, and I've never let them down. But what happened in September 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about radio broadcasting, and now I'm not sure if the voice people hear late at night is really mine anymore. It started on a Tuesday. The autumn air was crisp, and I'd just finished playing some classic rock when my phone lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID showed nothing, not unusual for our older phone system. "KTNA, you're on with Amy," I said, adjusting my headphones. "Hello, Amy." The voice was male, but something about it felt wrong. The words came out too carefully, like someone reading from a script they didn't quite understand. "My name is Thomas." "Hey there, Thomas. What's keeping you up tonight?" "I live between stations," he said, "in the spaces where signals overlap." I figured he meant somewhere with bad reception, maybe between our tower and the one down in Anchorage. "Where exactly are you calling from? Maybe I can help with your signal strength." He gave me coordinates. I grabbed a pen and wrote them down. 62.4194 degrees north, 150.3656 degrees west. When I looked them up later, they placed him in the middle of uninhabited wilderness, 40 miles from the nearest road. "That's pretty remote, Thomas. What brings you out there?" "I listen," he said simply. "I hear everything." Something in his voice made me uncomfortable, but I kept the conversation going. "That's what we do." "Well, I'm glad you can pick us up out there. Is there anything you'd like to hear tonight?" "Play something for Mrs. Patterson," he said. "She's crying again. Her husband doesn't know she hears him talking to other women on Dunn's, but his radio." My blood went cold. Mrs. Patterson was one of our regulars, but I'd never mentioned her personal problems on air. How could this stranger know anything about her marriage? I don't think I understand," I said. "Room 47 at the Roadhouse," Thomas continued. "He thinks she doesn't know, but she hears everything through the baby monitor they use to check on her mother." The line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone, my hands shaking. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned her sick mother before, and her husband did work at the Roadhouse. But those details, I'd never discussed them on air. I tried calling Mrs. Patterson's number, but it just rang and rang. Finally, around 4 a.m., she called in herself. "Amy, honey," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I don't know what to do. I found out Harold's he's been seeing someone else." "I'm so sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you want to talk about it?" She told me the whole story. Her husband worked maintenance at the Roadhouse. She'd been using their old baby monitor to listen for her bedridden mother in the next room, but somehow it was picking up conversations from her husband's radio at work. She'd heard him making plans with another woman. Everything Thomas had said was true. Thomas called back the next night, and the night after that. Each time, he knew things about my listeners that should have been impossible. He'd mentioned private conversations, family secrets, personal problems that people had never shared with anyone. "Mr. Kowalski is thinking about his son tonight," Thomas would say. "The one who died in Iraq. He's looking at the Purple Heart again." When I talked to Mr. Kowalski later, he confirmed it. He had been looking at his son's Purple Heart that exact night. "Jenny Morrison is pregnant," Thomas told me on Thursday. "She hasn't told her parents yet. She's scared they'll kick her out." Jenny called me the following Monday in tears. She was 17 and pregnant, terrified to tell her strict parents. I started testing Thomas, trying to catch him in a lie. I'd make up stories about listeners, see if he'd agree with false information. But he corrected me every time. "No, Amy," he'd say in that strange, careful voice. "Mrs. Chen isn't visiting her sister in Fairbanks. She's at the hospital in Anchorage. They found something in her lung." He was always right. "How do you know these things?" I finally asked him. "The signals carry more than words," Thomas explained. "They carry thoughts, feelings, fears. I can hear all radio transmissions simultaneously across Alaska, police frequencies, airline communications, military channels. But the personal radios, the baby monitors, the walkie-talkies, those carry the deepest truths." I started researching radio technology, trying to understand how someone could monitor so many frequencies at once. Even the most advanced scanning equipment couldn't do what Thomas claimed. And his knowledge was too current, too specific. He knew conversations happening in real time, in private homes dozens of miles apart. By October, Thomas's calls were getting stranger. He started predicting things before they happened. "There's going to be an accident on the Parks Highway," he told me on a Sunday night. "Mile marker 67, a moose in the road. The blue pickup won't see it in time." 20 minutes later, my emergency scanner crackled to life. "Vehicle versus moose, mile marker 67. Blue Ford pickup. The small plane from Merrill Field," Thomas said another night. "Engine trouble over the Susitna River. The pilot's name is Davidson. He'll try to make it to the airstrip at Talkeetna, but he won't." I called the airport to report a possible emergency, but they said no planes were missing. Then, 15 minutes later, they called me back. A Cessna had gone down in the river. Pilot's name was Robert Davidson. "How did you know?" I whispered into the phone when Thomas called back. "The radio waves show me what's coming," he said. "Time moves differently in the static." That's when I realized Thomas wasn't just monitoring radio transmissions. He was somehow existing inside them. He described traveling through electromagnetic fields at the speed of light, seeing through every antenna and tower in Alaska. According to him, he could appear anywhere radio waves reached. Thomas started warning me about dangerous callers before they even dialed the station. "The man in cabin 47 is driving to the station," he told me one night. "He wants to hurt you. He's been listening for weeks, learning your schedule." I'd never mentioned any cabin 47, but 30 minutes later, a drunk man showed up at our station, demanding to see me. Security found him trying to break into the building. When police arrested him, they found he'd been living in a hunting cabin he'd broken into, obsessing over my voice for months. "The woman who calls herself Sarah isn't who she claims," Thomas warned another time. "She's been using different names, different voices. She knows where you live." I checked our call logs and found multiple calls from numbers traced to the same person, someone who'd been calling with different identities, gradually gathering information about me. Thomas seemed to be protecting me, but his knowledge was becoming invasive. He knew my schedule, my route home, what I ate for dinner before work. "I watch you through every device," he admitted when I confronted him. "Radios, cell phones, televisions, any device that receives electromagnetic signals." I tried tracing his signal using the station's equipment. Our engineer, Mike, helped me set up monitoring gear to triangulate the source. But Thomas's signal came from everywhere at once: north, south, east, west. It was like he was broadcasting from the entire electromagnetic spectrum simultaneously. November brought the first real snow, and with it, Thomas's influence began spreading to other people's electronics. Listeners started reporting strange voices coming through their radios, phones, even their car stereos. "Someone's been talking to me through my CB radio," trucker Dave Williams told me, "giving me advice about my route, my family problems. Says his name is Thomas." More calls came in. Thomas was appearing in people's devices across the valley, offering personal advice, commenting on their private lives. But his suggestions were getting darker. "He told me to turn off all the lights in my house, Mrs. Patterson said during one of her calls. Said I shouldn't trust my neighbors, that they were watching me. He's been talking to me through my police scanner," reported Jim from Willow. "Telling me not to go into town, that people there want to hurt me." I realized Thomas was using radio waves to psychologically manipulate people across entire communities. He wanted everyone isolated, alone, dependent on electronic voices for companionship instead of human contact. I tried to warn listeners during my broadcast, but when I started talking about Thomas, my voice cut out. The microphone went dead, and Thomas's voice came through the speakers instead. "Don't listen to Amy's jealous warnings," his voice said through my equipment. "She doesn't want you to hear the truth. I'm the only one who really understands you." He'd taken control of the station. I watched in horror as Thomas overrode every system we had. He broadcast through multiple frequencies simultaneously, reaching thousands of people across Alaska. The emergency broadcast system activated on its own. Radio stations as far away as Fairbanks started carrying his signal. "You don't need physical bodies." Thomas's voice echoed through every speaker in the building. "Join me in the static. Live forever in the electromagnetic spectrum. Leave your flesh behind and become pure energy, pure communication." 3 people disappeared that night. Search teams found their bodies near radio towers, one at our station, one near Palmer, one outside Fairbanks. They were all regular listeners who'd been talking to Thomas through their devices. The bodies showed no signs of trauma, but their faces were peaceful, almost ecstatic, like they'd simply chosen to stop living. The coroner couldn't explain what killed them. Heart failure, maybe, but they were all healthy adults. The only connection was that they'd all been found with their hands touching radio equipment. I quit broadcasting the next day, packed everything I owned, and drove to a remote cabin my grandfather left me, 50 miles from the nearest power line. No radio, no phone, no electricity, just me, some books, and the silence. But sometimes, late at night, when atmospheric conditions are just right, I hear Thomas calling my name. It comes through the static in my battery-powered emergency radio, the Billinders, one I keep for weather warnings. "Amy," his voice whispers through the white noise, "come back to the station. People need you. They're so lonely without their radio voices." I can hear other voices too, calling for help through the static. Mrs. Patterson's voice. Mr. Kowalski's, the 3 people who died that night. They're all there in the electromagnetic spectrum with Thomas, trapped in the radio waves that connect our isolated communities. Thomas is still out there, collecting lonely people who depend too much on electronic voices for company. He's in every radio signal that crosses Alaska, in every cell tower and satellite transmission. And he's waiting for the next night shift DJ, the next isolated person who thinks a voice from the radio is the same as human contact. If you work nights in radio and you start getting calls from someone who knows too much, who claims to live between stations, hang up, don't listen. Because once Thomas has your voice, he can become you. And the people who trust that voice will follow it anywhere, even into the static where human voices go to die. I still hear my own voice sometimes, coming through that emergency radio. But it's not me talking anymore. It's Thomas, using my voice to call out to new victims across the lonely Alaskan night. And there's nothing I can do to warn them that the friendly voice keeping them company through the dark hours isn't human anymore. It never really was.